about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with me. Be free. Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good evening, everyone. It's Jim here at TUHQ, and welcome to the second in our series of live streamed study sessions for A-level law. And I'm joined tonight by Emily and Rabina. Emily in the middle, Rabina on the right. Good afternoon, sorry, good evening, team. I'm losing track of time because it's so late. And now I've got an apology to make at the start of this session. I had misread the communications, and I came prepared actually. Sleeping bag, popcorn. I thought loss of control, which is tonight's topic, was going to be like a double split session that will go on and on and on, but it's not. I'm told it's occupiers liability, which is next week, where we've got a bumper session where we get a 5-minute or 10-minute break in between. So tonight is a normal session, 25-30 minutes or so, looking at loss of control. If you're here for the first time for one of our live streams, then if you're joining us live, welcome. You get a chance to use the live chat window there on YouTube to type your answers in or to ask some questions of Emily and Rabina. And we'll be looking out for as many answers as possible, maybe giving you the odd shout out here and there as well. So do have a go. If you're watching on catch up and looking at last week's session, about 500 students have already watched the session on catch up. Then you don't get to use the live chat, unfortunately. But of course, you get a bit more time, maybe to pause the video, have a go at the question, and then start the video again to see how you got on. A mix of activities, and don't forget you can download the slides. So in these study live streams, we're spending a little bit of time explaining some of the important content. You'll be able to download all of that from the link I'll give you at the end. So don't worry about writing everything down. You can download it all. I think that just about covers it. I think Emily, Rabina, do you think we're good to go?
I think so.
Right, have fun everyone. All the best.
Thank you. All right. So thank you for that intro. And for those of you joining us, welcome to the Loss of Control study stream. We're going to get started with a quick question. So I want you to pop your answers into the chat. I want you to think about what voluntary manslaughter actually is. So how would you describe it? How would you define it? What does it involve? What does it not include? What does it include? Off you go. When you're ready, pop your answers into the chat. So I'll be thinking about the actus reus. Okay, good. With mens rea of what? Yeah, that's a good start. Well done. Come on, let's get a few more answers in there. What is voluntary manslaughter? What would it involve? Trying not to give the answer away here. What would it involve? What is the mens rea requirement of it? Again, keep trying to think of hints without giving too much of the answer away. All right, we'll just leave it a few more seconds.
Georgie's halfway there, isn't she?
Just want to kind of add a little bit more there. Okay, it seems like George is the only one who's not too shy. So let's move on to the answer. All right, thank you. So voluntary manslaughter is an offence where the defendant has committed an unlawful killing with the mens rea of murder, which is, as we've just got in the chat there, the intent to cause GBH or death. However, rather than the defendant being convicted of murder, they're convicted instead of voluntary manslaughter because the jury accept the defence of loss of control, diminished responsibility, or sometimes, on occasion, it can be both, under the Coroners and Justice Act 2009, which both of those defences come under. If you were with us last week, we covered the diminished responsibility defence. This week, as I say, we're going to concentrate on loss of control. Can we move on to the next slide, please? This is a handy diagram to illustrate or to identify the offence that's being committed in the scenario. So when you get presented with a scenario, you need to sometimes identify whether the defendant has committed murder, voluntary manslaughter, or sometimes involuntary manslaughter. To help you decide, you can use this handy little flowchart. And remember, you can get these PowerPoints downloaded after the session, so don't feel like you have to copy all of this down. To ask yourself, did the defendant intend death or GBH? You are identifying whether the defendant could be convicted of murder, the more serious offence in English law, voluntary manslaughter, which is one step down from that, or involuntary manslaughter. I'm not going to talk too much about involuntary manslaughter because that will be on a different session. But if the defendant did have the mens rea for murder, which is to intend death or GBH, they obviously could be convicted of murder. Alternatively, they could be convicted of voluntary manslaughter. And that is via diminished responsibility or loss of control. Now, there's something that you must remember here that sometimes students get confused with. Diminished responsibility and loss of control are defences to murder. They are not offences in and of themselves. You would be charged with murder or voluntary manslaughter, but diminished responsibility and loss of control are defences to murder. They're also known as special and partial defences because they're only available to murder and they don't allow you to just be completely acquitted of the offence. You get a conviction reduced from murder to that of voluntary manslaughter if diminished responsibility or loss of control are successful. So, handy little diagram to help you identify the appropriate offence from a scenario. All right. On this next slide, we've got the elements of loss of control. So, as I mentioned, this defence, along with diminished responsibility, is contained in the Coroners and Justice Act 2009. You do need to be aware of the sections. So, whereas diminished responsibility comes under Section 52, loss of control comes under Section 54 to 55. And Section 54, specifically subsection 1, it'd be great if you could recall the subsections as well, requires the defendant to demonstrate these three requirements. They must have lost self-control, and I'm going to ask you a question about that in just a second. It must be resulting from a qualifying trigger, and there are two of them. Again, we'll get to that in a moment. And finally, they must satisfy the objective test. A person of the defendant's age and sex with a normal level of tolerance and self-restraint in the same circumstances of the defendant should have acted in the same way or a similar way to the defendant. And all of those elements must be considered sequentially and separately. And so if even one of those fails, the whole defence fails. Okay, so here's a quick question. Get your typing fingers at the ready. In which case was loss of control defined? So I just want the case name, and there is a little image to help you out as a hint. If you want to go for the bonus question, tell me who was it who defined loss of self-control? So pop your answers into the chat once you think that you know the case name that defined loss of control. Remember, use that image to help you recall. Even if you're not too sure, the image should help you remember, even if there's just a few cases that you're kind of thinking about. Okay, we've got one answer from Abby there. Well done. All right, could we get the answer up on the screen? Let's see if Abby's correct. Brilliant, well done. So it is in RV Duel that loss of control was defined, and if you wanted to, you could also, well done Georgie as well there, if you wanted to, you could also remember that it was Lord Rafferty who stated that definition, and there it is there. It's a loss of the ability to act in accordance with considered judgment, or it's a loss of normal powers of reasoning, which is a little bit easier to recall. All right, well done both of you. Let's move on. All right, the next task is called the big reveal. If you've done these sessions before, you know that this is a common activity that we do at Tutor to You. Want you to work out what is hidden behind the question mark at the bottom of the screen before all 5 of the clues are revealed, or if you're struggling, once all 5 of the clues are revealed. So I'm going to start with clue 1. This case was heard in 1978. So that's your first clue. When you think you know the answer, when you think you know the case that is being revealed slowly, pop your answers into the chat. Okay, let's go for clue 2. This one's going to reveal a little bit more. The defendant in this case was initially convicted of murder, but on appeal had their conviction reduced to that of voluntary manslaughter on the grounds of loss of control. If you think you know the case, pop your answer in the chat, although there are still lots of cases that this could be if you didn't know the date. So you might want to hold off if you're not sure. Let's go for clue 3. This is going to help a lot of you out. The defendant was a 15-year-old boy. It's one of the very few cases with such a young defendant. Ooh, I thought we'd have some answers there. Clearly people are a little bit stuck. Let's go for clue 4. Oh, okay, we've got one case. Brilliant, well done. The defendant killed his attacker who had sexually assaulted him previously and was attempting to do the same thing again by hitting him over the head with a chapati pan. Very specific detail there, which will hopefully help you to recall the details of the case and the name of the case as well. Again, if you think you know the answer before clue 5 and before the case name is revealed, pop your answer in the chat. I'm not going to say whether the answer in the chat currently is the correct one just yet. Okay, let's go for clue 5. Okay, it was in this case that the legal principle of the objective test and what characteristics were considered or would be able to be considered were taken into account. So it was decided that the defendant's age and sex were relevant in considering the objective test. Does anybody else think that they know what this case is going to be before we reveal? So we've had one person say DPP versus Camplin. Again, I'm not going to say whether that's correct or not. All right, let's reveal. So congratulations, Katharina, you got that correct. DPP versus Camplin was indeed the case where a 15-year-old boy who'd been sexually assaulted had killed his attacker over the head with a chapati pan. It was decided in this case that when applying the objective test, it was important to consider the characteristics of both age and sex when deciding what the reasonable person would have done in that situation. Thank you very much. All right, now you've got a 30-second challenge. So you have 30 seconds to type as many key cases associated with loss of control as you possibly can. So you can do it one of two ways. You can either type type and then press enter and just do one at a time, or you can wait until the very end of the 30 seconds, see how many you can type, and then put them all in the chat all at once. All right, let's get the timer up on the screen. All right, once you're ready, the timer starts now. 5 seconds left. Okay, pop your answers into the chat. First of all, congratulations to Tutor to you, who correctly identified DP versus Pamplin there. Well done. All right, we'll just wait a few seconds for everybody to finish typing. Very well done there. Well done, Clinton. Yep, Clinton, you can use for 2 key principles. So the first one being that the 3 elements of loss of control must be considered sequentially and separately, and that also illustrates that you need to have all 3 elements of loss of control proven in order to satisfy the defence. The other thing that you can use Clinton for is that sexual infidelity, although it's a restriction, is able to be considered when there are certain other elements involved in the case. I'm going to let Rabina talk through that because that's relevant to one of the tasks that Rabina is going to talk you through. Let's see what other cases we've got. Yeah, Alawalia, Hatter, Bowyer, Clinton, Gregson, Ward, Jewell, Dawes. Brilliant. Dawes is another one that is used to illustrate one of the restrictions on the defence. That's brilliant. Dawes illustrates that incitement is a restriction on the defence, so well done for remembering that. Hatter is a good one to remember in relation to the anger trigger, because that tells us that there are 2 requirements of that. We've got Clinton. Jewell is obviously one that we mentioned earlier on. What are the other ones that we've got? Ward, yeah, can be... Ward illustrated that the defendant can rely on the defence even if they are using the fear trigger in relation to fear of violence against somebody else, not necessarily themselves. And I think we've got time for one more. Alawalia is a good case to remember as well, or you could alternatively remember Bailey and Thornton as well. Alawalia was unsuccessful in using this defence because of the delay. However, she did use the old defence of provocation. The new defence allows for the loss of control not to be sudden anymore, so she would be more likely to be able to successfully use that defence. Thornton is another good key case that's very similar to Alawalia. Both involved abusive husbands who had subjected their partners to a long period of abuse. Thornton, though, illustrates that the last straw can be a trigger for loss of control, so it's a good one to use. Just to list a few other cases, Camplin for the objective test, Humphreys, which illustrates that you can have both triggers, the anger and the fear trigger, occur at the same time. Zebedee, which is a good one for the anger trigger. Ibrams and Gregory is another one that you might want to use in relation to a restriction on the defence. Specifically, revenge is not able to be relied on as a result of loss of control. And then finally, Mohammed and Holly, which both illustrate that things like bad temper, not sleeping well, being hungry, that sort of thing, would not be able to be considered as characteristics when you're using the objective test. All right, I'm now going to pass over to Rabina, who's going to start us off with a 4-3-2-1 activity.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for that, Emily. Well done for those people getting all those cases in the chat there. It is difficult sometimes to get them, isn't it? But as many cases as you can use in your exam questions, the better there. So excellent wide range there as well, which is good. So I'm going to move on to a 4-3-2-1 now. And you do have a couple of minutes for this. So we'll see how quick you can get your answers typed into the chat. But we are going to pretty much ask you for a variety of things. So we want 4 restrictions on loss of control. So Emily has just mentioned a couple. So if your ears are open, you might be able to get those in quite quick. So can we have 4 restrictions on loss? 3 tests. So what are the 3 tests that we use that Emily's explained a little bit further? Can we remember anything about the two triggers? Because we need to have a look at those a little bit more in depth. And can we remember what the Act of Parliament is? So again, as Millie said there, it doesn't matter whether you sort of do your answers for one little bit and then move on, or whether you do it sort of all together and click enter at the end. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes. Let's have a go.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So can we remember any of the triggers, any of the tests, anything that might block the defence potentially? A little bit faster now, we're over halfway through. Yes, Georgie, you've got one there. Excellent. Can you remember the other one? Excellent, Abby.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Excellent. Katerina's just come in there quickly with some of those elements. So let's just go through and check if we were correct on these. So we wanted you to look at the things that are restricted, because often in exam questions, some of the scenarios might pick on some of these elements. I know even today I've done a scenario with my students and it has picked on a potential restriction here. So we mentioned it's sexual infidelity. So well done, Abby, because you've mentioned that there. And you might have used the case of Clinton for that. Very memorable case, isn't it? That sexual infidelity on its own will not be a trigger. It can be looked at if there are other things and other triggers that are there, which is quite interesting, because when you look at the old law of provocation from the Homicide Act, you know, that's why provocation was created, to allow people to kill the partners who had cheated on them. So it's quite a big shift, really, that the Coroners and Justice Act is now restricting that. You can't use it for cheating, you can't use it for honour killings, whereas previous law you would have been able to, wouldn't you? So it's just a good thing to see that development of law, really. So well done for that one. Intoxication, yeah, same as DR. We just ignore the intoxication, don't we? You can still use intoxication as a defence to murder, but you're not really going to get very far with it. At the most, it is going to just drop it down to a partial defence there, isn't it? Revenge. So I don't think I saw revenge in the chat, but yes, if you are acting in revenge, potentially you will not get this defence. And even if you think of somebody like Jewel from the activity Emily did, potentially you could argue that was maybe in revenge because of the bullying, couldn't you? And the fact that he had the car packed ready for everything to sort of run away there. So yeah, revenge won't work. And then if you incite it yourself, and Dawes is a very, very good case for that, to show you that, you know, he woke him up. So you can't say that you were scared of violence, can you? It's a good way to show that if you start the fight yourself, then there's no way you can use this as a defence. So definitely check for those in scenario questions. If there's any suggestion that any of these are there, you are potentially going to then have to fail that defence, aren't you? And the defendant will go to prison for murder. So that's your restrictions. Move on to 3 then. It was just a 3-part test here. So very well done, Katerina, because you've got the last bit there, haven't you? We judge you against that person of the same sex, age, and in your circumstances there. So again, following on from Camplin, You've then got the other two parts here, so loss of control and trigger. Just want to spend a minute on the trigger issue, because there is two qualifying triggers under Section 55. The fear trigger, which has already correctly been identified. Well done for that, Georgie. And we also have the anger trigger. And it's the anger trigger that's had the most change again since the 2009 Act came into account. So with the anger trigger, we've got to prove those extra characteristics now, haven't we? So we have to prove that they've done or said something to anger you, but it has to be extremely grave, has to amount to an extremely grave character, and it has to give you a justifiable sense of being wronged. So not only are you feeling wronged, but it has to be justifiable. The jury have to agree. And that's where, as Emily said earlier, Zebedee could be quite a good case to use for that, because before the 2009 Act, Zebedee may have got away with that defence if you think about cases such as Doughty, where all you had to prove was that they said or did something, and he could say, yep, my dad's got Alzheimer's, he soiled himself. But because you have to have a justifiable sense of being wronged, that wouldn't work today, would it? Because, if somebody is older and they've got Alzheimer's, that doesn't give you a reason to kill them. That does happen as somebody gets older. So identifying the correct trigger in that case, or even if it's both, as in Humphreys, then you can link those in there. But again, it's just really key for those extra bits on the anger trigger. So it has to be really serious what they've done, and it has to give you a justifiable sense of being wronged. So just to sort of confirm those there. Right, and then we move on to the two triggers, which again, I know I've just picked on a little bit more there, but you've got your anger trigger and you do have your fear trigger, don't you? So again, just spot for those. Make sure you've got a case example for each. And again, there's quite a few that popped up in the chat there earlier, so well done for that. And then finally, at the very start, we looked at the Act of Parliament, didn't we? So Coroners and Justice Act 2009, that completely abolished the old law and it created the new defence under Section 54 and 55. So well done for those fantastic answers there. All of them correct as well, which is sometimes unheard of. So I've mentioned a little bit about this when we've done the 4, 3, 2, 1 there, but it's just to confirm the restrictions. So where you're probably not going to be able to get this defence. You want your barrister to help you argue this so you can get a manslaughter charge instead of a murder charge, but it's potentially not going to work, is it, if it is having these factors? So we've got the fact that you might incite it, or you can refer to it as self-induced. That will get you the credit as well. If you've brought it on yourself, like with Dawes, he woke him up. So that's not going to work because he's brought it on himself. Revenge. So if that isn't an act of revenge, like Ibrahim's and Gregory, they lured him back to the flat, it was an act of revenge, wasn't it? Or any other cases that your teacher might have gone through with you to show that element of revenge. Sexual infidelity on its own is a no now under Clinton. But if there is another potential trigger, then that could be looked at, couldn't it? But unfortunately, Clinton made that stupid decision of them pleading guilty, didn't he? Which is a bit annoying because he could have potentially looked at it there. And as we've already mentioned, intoxication, that won't be looked at all, will it? If you really want that taken into account, you'll have to use the defence of intoxication, which again, another tricky area. So I imagine we'll have another session on that at some point soon. So, a couple of exam tips then. We thought it might be useful just as you are possibly coming up to assessments, if not before half term, then maybe afterwards. As we've said there, it's very important that you do fully explain and apply the triggers. Whenever students do exam questions, this is where I do tend to have to sort of not give them full credit for, because they've either not applied the trigger or they've not said why. I know that sounds really, really obvious, but sometimes I'll just get answers saying, yeah, it can use the anger trigger, or yes, it can use the fear trigger, but it's that explanation that's really, really key in these exam questions. The examiner wants you to explain it as if they've never done anything to do with law before. So imagine you're explaining it to a relative of yours that has no idea. Really make it clear. But the triggers does tend to be the bit that is a little bit weaker. So please make sure you go over both triggers. you apply them in the question properly. So why can't, I don't know, Susie use the fear trigger in that situation? Well, why does she fear really serious violence? Can she use anger? If she can, apply those two extra elements. Is it really grave? What's this person's done? And does it give them a justifiable sense of being wronged? So that's a sort of a bit of a tip, really, because it is difficult to get full marks and loss of control, because that is obviously generally one that does end up causing us some issues there. Just because it's new, under the old law, you never had those grave and JSBW, did you? Where you do have that under the new law. So it's just a little bit of practice on making sure we've covered those fully with a Y. And then again, your second exam tip, anytime you refer to an Act of Parliament with its sections, that does count as case citation. So when you're looking at areas of law, you might have 3, 4, 5 cases that you're going to do for your full marks, depending on your exam board. Well, technically, this would count as one of those cases, but we do need the correct year and we do need the sections. So if there is an area of law with an Act of Parliament, it is really, 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 really important that it is there. So things like voluntary manslaughter, non-fatal offences, property, anything that's got an act, that should really be within your first couple of lines. So, going to play another game now then, so you can get yourselves ready for the chat. Each sort of slide has got 2 statements on it, and we just need you to work out A, B, C, or D. So A is statement 1 true and statement 2 true. B is statement 1 true but 2 false. C, false true, and then D, false false. So it's just about quickly reading the statement. Is it correct? Is it not correct? And then is it then going to be A, B, C, or D? So all I need you to do is put the letter in the chat here that you think. So if we have a look at this first one, so the defence is only available for murder, so is that true or false? And that should eliminate at least one of the answers, if not 2. And then statement 2, if it is successful, you avoid the mandatory life sentence. Is that true or false? So we'll give you a couple of seconds to have a look. So we've got sort of a few of these coming through for this game. So I'll give you a minute. So is it true, true, false, false, true, false, false, true? What letter do you think will replicate those 2 statements? Got one answer in at the minute from Kieran. We'll just wait for a few more. George is in there. On the ball today. And you, Katerina, on the ball. Saskan with A. Right, let's have a reveal then, please, Jim. Excellent. So well done, Georgie, Katerina and Sass there. So yeah, we've got both statements true, aren't there? So we can use the defence to murder, and then you don't get that mandatory life sentence because you're getting a manslaughter sentence instead, which is discretionary life. So well done, everyone that got that one correct there. We'll move on to number 2. So same again, just bob the correct letter in. So loss of control is a full defence to murder. So is that one true or false? And then statement 2, loss of control is a partial defence to murder. True or false? So which one does this replicate? A, B, C, or D? Got one at the minute. Let's give it another few seconds. Yep, Jim? You have the answer? Correct. Yes, definitely. And as Tutor 2 says there, Emily's already mentioned that, hasn't she? So it is, yeah, the first statement is incorrect. It's not a full defence, is it? Or we'd all be using it. It's definitely going to be a partial defence, which is why C. Excellent. Well done. Good. Right, number 3 then. So all 3 requirements must be proven, otherwise the defence will fail. So do we need to prove all 3, loss, trigger and the normal person test? And then statement 2, it can be relied on if you satisfy 2 of the 3 requirements. So what have we got? A, B, C or D? Kieran, straight in there. Oh, Molly's joined us. Sass back in. Yeah, if we have the answer, please, Jim. Yes, excellent. You're all on the ball now. Like it. So, yeah, statement 1 is true, isn't it? We have to prove all 3 if we want to try to raise this defence in court. Fabulous. Right then, so the next one, characteristics such as bad temper can be considered when applying the objective test. And then statement 2, D can rely on the fear trigger even if they incited the violence. So it depends if you remember the case, what we referred to for this one. So again, A, B, C or D. Got a mix of answers for this one. Okay, we'll go through. Yep, so the right answer is statement D then, isn't it? Yep, so statement 1 is false. It's a normal degree of tolerance and self-restraint, isn't it? So it's anything that would be considered generalised for everybody. And yet statement 2 is false, isn't it? Because if you do incite it, it won't work. And again, that brings us back to Dawes. I really like that case because it does show that, he brought it on himself. So it's right that he shouldn't get the defence. Plus, you can't really argue you're scared, can you, if you wake them up? So it definitely wasn't going to work. Excellent. Right then, so statement 1. So to satisfy the anger trigger, it's got to amount to circumstances of an extremely grave character and give you JSBW, as I'd shorten it, justifiable sense of being wronged. Or statement 2, to satisfy the anger trigger, you must have experienced a fear of serious violence from the victim against you or somebody else. So again, which one, A, B, C or D, do you think this one relates to? Give you an extra minute for this because there's a little bit more reading. Can hear somebody. Oh, I like that. Kieran's already corrected himself. Yes, well done, guys. So we'll get that last bit on there then, ready for the last activity. So yeah, statement 1 is true, isn't it? So we've got to have those 2 extra things. It's got to be grave, what they've done. It's got to be really serious. And it has to give you a JSBW, a justifiable sense of being wronged, which, again, the jury must agree with, mustn't they? So yeah, statement 2 is false, isn't it? The fear trigger is completely different to anger. Fabulous. Right, so we're going to move on to the last activity now. So I'm going to pass you back over to Emily.
Thanks very much, Robina. And thanks for that, by the way. That exam gold was exactly that, just exam gold. So I hope that everybody was paying attention when you were explaining that, because that was really important.
Right. Definitely happens with my students.
So what you've got on the screen in front of you now is a grid of key cases and terms. All I need you to do is identify those that are associated with loss of control. And this is our last activity. So I just want you to go for it. Don't wait until the last second. Just type in as soon as you identify something that you think is associated with loss of control. So do you think it's objective test, Deichmann, Hatter, Jewell, Sears? And just as soon as you notice something, pop it into the chat. So we've got Georgie, who said Jewell. Yes, you are correct. Jewell was the key case that defined loss of control. So that's a really good one to recall. Well done. Which others on there do you think are examples of key cases or key terms or acts of parliament that are relevant to the defence of loss of control? Well done, tutor to you. Yes, Deichmann was diminished responsibility. You must have remembered that from last session. Well done, Hatter. Yeah, we use for the anger trigger. Kaplan, brilliant. The objective test. Zebedee, again, the anger trigger, and really useful as it's an example to illustrate that one. Yeah, it is section 54 to section 55 of the Coroners and Justice Act. Well done, Georgie and Katerina. Well done for not being tricked. Well done for not being tricked by the other one, the section 52 of the Coroners and Justice Act grid, because that one is relevant to the other defence of diminished responsibility. Yeah, well done. Fear and anger are both triggers that we can use for the defence. That is the second requirement of the defence. Well done. Let's just leave it a few seconds, see if there's any more that people can identify. There is another case on there. Oh, well done. Yep, Alawalia. We can use that to demonstrate the fear trigger. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to use it because of the old defence of provocation. Yep, well done, Alawalia. Fantastic. Okay, there is also one more case, but we didn't really mention it. Yeah, Camplin. I think somebody mentioned that earlier. Yeah, well done. There's also one more key case, if anybody can get that one. Okay, let's get the answers up on the screen. All right, that last one that we didn't get was Asmalash, and I don't know whether anybody mentioned the objective test as well, just looking back through the comments. So the objective test would be the final requirement of loss of control. That's the final element where you would mention Camplin. Asmalash is really only relevant if intoxication comes up in the scenario. So don't beat yourselves up if you didn't remember that one. That is fine. All right, well done, everybody. That is your last activity.
Wow.
You have just popped in the chat where you can view the slides so that you're not having to copy everything down.
Yeah, just posted that into live chat, and also I'll post a link onto the YouTube recording as well, which I think takes about 5 or 10 minutes for YouTube to process in one of the comments box on YouTube. So I don't think the live chat repeats itself on replay, but I'll make sure that link is posted. Wow, fantastic session, and
Yeah,
a huge
definitely.
thanks
Thank you,
to
Georgia.
amazing responses. And a huge thanks to Emily in particular, who's designed this session, put a lot of work in putting it together and delivering it so well with Rubina. So many thanks for taking some time out on a busy, I know it's a busy school night as well, to deliver a fantastic session. Just looking at the live chat, still got loads and loads of students here as well. Fantastic numbers tonight. Really pleased with those. And we've now done two sessions, haven't we? We've done diminished responsibility last week, loss of control this week, and it's next week where we have the double header with 10 minutes ice cream and popcorn break in between on occupiers liability, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah, Occupiers 57 first, and then I think there's a little breakers at the gym, and then a bit of Occupiers 84. So definitely, if there are areas that you think you could work on, join up to those sessions. And again, as Jim said, these are all available online for you to download and use the slides for revision, because yeah, they are absolutely fantastic. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, go for it. So tutord.net/live for all this series for this term, but also don't forget we did quite a few last term as well, so there may well be some recordings and downloads that come in handy if you've got some assessments or homework, or even some mocks and exams coming up soon. Many thanks for joining us live. If you're watching on catch up, hopefully you found it useful as well. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. Emily and Rubina are paid by the number of thumbs that they get for each video, so please do not press the thumbs up video. Now please, you can go ahead and do it. Oh, by the way, there is no shortage of thumbs up. So whatever you do. Fantastic session. We'll catch you all again this time next week, and have a great week.
Well done, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.